So the GOP has a real problem with extremists. Well, America has a problem with right-wing extremists, and the GOP is the cause of that problem. They know it, and they have literally covered this up for years and years and years. Back in the George W. Bush administration, the Department of Homeland Security put out a report talking about the biggest threats to America. And right at the top, number one was global warming. Number two was right-wing extremism. And I believe 1 year when they put out this report in the Bush administration, this is how far back it goes, right-wing extremism was number one. This was buried. And to the shame of all of us, it was buried both by corporate media, which did not apparently want to anger the right, and most importantly by Republicans. Well, it's getting harder and harder for the GOP to do that these days because we are getting more and more terrorist attacks. Once upon a time, these people were terrified of foreign terrorist attacks. If only they knew the truth. Here is a compilation of the GOP trying to distract from LGBTQ plus attacks, or attacks on those people.
Today's hearing is but an attempt to blame Republicans for the horrendous acts of violence.
This is a blame Republicans so we don't have to take responsibility for our own defund the police and soft on crime policies.
I think, one, if we look at the type of people committing the crimes, the breakdown of the family. And, of course, we have people here who've stood with Black Lives Matter, who initially was opposed to that.
Just to be clear, that was a hearing this month on the topic of anti-LGBTQ violence. And yet, true to form, Republicans were eager to play the victim card and the change the subject card and the anything but let's solve a problem card, blaming the rise in violence on crime, on defund the police, on migrants crossing the border, and on the breakdown of the family. We're back with our panel. Janelle, what is the, as a student of some of these structural problems, how do you get to the beginning of combating this line where the ideology triggers violence, or the ideology seeps into the mind of someone who's unstable and capable of violence, which seems like a very complicated, very intricate, and very sort of all hands on deck mission. How do you begin to tackle that if again, you've got this refusal to even look in the mirror and say that as a country we have a problem with extremism and its capacity to spill into violence?
Nicole, the first thing we do in intelligence and homeland security is we look at the threat environment. I point you to a Southern Poverty Law Center report that indicates that from 2008 to last year, anti-government groups increased by 300%. And so whereas we had in 2008 about 150, now we're looking at about 500. The threat environment is rich right now for this type of activity, violent extremism. It comes from, obviously, politicians. It comes from conservative media.
Real quick, that guy, I almost paused it to chastise him, but he saved it right at the end there. They're so used to not saying the GOP. He said politicians, not right-wing politicians. There's not Democrats that are causing these issues. I don't like the Democrats, but they are not responsible for any domestic terrorism. The Republican Party is. But I'll let him go because he's nailing it.
But it also comes from the internet. It comes from the dark
True.
and deep web, sites we've heard about, the lack
Peterson.
of content moderation.
Ben
and the fact
Shapiro.
of the matter is, and I hate to say this, hate sells in this country. And many see the division of America as an enterprise that can gain them either votes or clicks or cash. And we can.
Sorry, my little chuckle there was I was just remembering Sam Cedar absolutely smoking that one guy who is another promoter of terrorism. Can't even remember his name, but he goes, "Oh no, Sam Cedar, what a nightmare." Amazing. Anyway,
Don't have to look that far past someone like Nick Fuentes and some of these
Steven
other
Crowder.
people who are
That's
in this threat environment that are stoking this type of hate. We have ignored the domestic violent and domestic extremism problem for many, many years.
Yes.
And now it's coming back to bite us. And it's coming back to bite us because they are enabled now by technology, particularly the social media aspect. But also you have people who are so-called influencers who are stoking this. The last thing I'll say is that
Andrew Tate arrested yesterday, not terrorism, but for human trafficking. Steven Crowder, now that I can remember his name, I want to pick on him with his stupid holsters, all his little hint. Yes, absolutely. And let's call him like we sees him, Tucker Carlson, on air every night. He is a stochastic terrorist.
The part that I find interesting, once again, as a student and as a professor of Homeland Security, is this constant friction between security and safety and privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. There's never any equilibrium. And so most of these hate groups, they hide behind the First Amendment until they go operational. And there's a very limited time between the time that they decide to go operational and they become violent to interdict them. They also hide behind the Second Amendment.
Yes.
And these groups for decades have amassed weapons and tactics, techniques, and procedures that make them very, very lethal now.
Within my own state, the okay state of Michigan, the Wolverine Watchman, we just had a conviction of the leader. He got 16 years in prison, followed by the conviction of Barry Croft, another member. He got 19 and a half years in prison. What for? They were going to kidnap and kill the governor of Michigan. That was their plan. It's not a joke, folks. There's nothing different about these terrorists than the Taliban. They are, other than I suppose, the strength of the government in terms of numbers, in terms of literally how many guns and bullets there are, that opposes them. It's Al Qaeda. It really. The Republican Party is nothing but a bunch of criminals, and there's different kinds of criminals within them, but all of them seek to do evil. You don't, on the national level, I cannot think of a Republican politician whose policy set has a benefit for their constituents. The closest you can come to a Republican politician at the national level who is not straight up just robbing America would be somebody who is talking about irrelevant things. The way they get votes is to fire up culture wars. But if you spend your entire career telling your constituents that the problems they face come from another culture of people, you are going to inevitably get somebody who grows up in that environment and says, I'm going to do something about it. Click, clack. That's what you're going to get.
Yeah, it is. It's the First Amendment while they're talking about it, the Second Amendment while they're planning it, and the right to privacy that they don't see in reproductive rights when they're operational. It's amazing. Pete Strzok, I want to read to you some revelations from the January 6th report that we haven't gotten to yet here on this show. It's not just people willing to tell the truth and if they see something, say something. Mitch McConnell, of all people, was on the phone with Donald Trump's national security advisor, warning that ex-military represented a threat to President-elect Joe Biden. Let me read some of that reporting to you. 2 days after pro-Trump rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol, then National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien got a call from Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell and an aide who asked him to look into something he'd been hearing. Retired military personnel sympathetic to Trump might be preparing to prevent Joe Biden's inauguration. Quote, he was concerned that there were reports that there were retired military personnel who were sympathetic to the president and might be organizing, O'Brien said in the interview. McConnell's own national security aide, Robert Karam, was on the call as well and raised similar concerns about Navy SEALs, O'Brien said. That's from reporting in Politico about the O'Brien transcripts being part of this final report. I know the right went nuts when the new defense secretary and Pentagon leaders sought to examine extremism in the military. And I wonder, Pete, what you make of our ability to at least shine a light on it as a first step to combating it.
Well, Nicole, that episode with McConnell is absolutely chilling, and I think it is an area that I'm really concerned about radicalization within the military ranks and within law enforcement as well. But you're absolutely right. I mean, when you look at the last National Defense Authorization Act that was just passed, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, there were several measures, maybe 6 or 7 measures that had funding for the Department of Defense to do studies and to look at the phenomena of radicalization within the officer corps, within the enlisted corps.
Okay. Really focus in on this. He's saying there was budget in there for studies. The right wing wants, above all else, knowledge suppressed, facts not found, because they know the facts look bad for them. They know that when you lay out cause and effect of their policy, of their behavior, you will see a nightmare scenario. They refused to let the CDC collect data on gun violence. They blocked that. They take every opportunity they can to block the collection of knowledge because they don't want you to have it. Let's hear him say that exact thing in fancier words.
Figure out how big the problem was and what might be done to combat it. But because it has become such a political issue, all of those measures were stripped out of it. They almost zeroed out all the funding.
Because it has become a political issue? No. This dude comes from the school of making things vague so you're not offensive to people that frankly need to be offended. No, it's not become a political issue because Republicans blocked it, because Republicans are afraid of what it's going to say, because they know already. They know.
That had been proposed for even just taking a look at the problem to figure out whether or not it was an issue, how broad an issue it was, and what might be done. We're not even going to give money to take the first look at that. And the issue at the end of the day, I mean, I completely agree with Danelle that there is a profit motive behind it, but there's also a political motive. I mean, we had Marjorie Taylor Greene in her text, I think Mark Meadows talking about all the QAnon people saying, these are my people. There are people right now in Congress who have as their constituents who put them into power adherents of QAnon and some of these other extraordinarily dangerous groups who have violent ideologies at their fringes. And so it's not just a profit issue, it's a political power issue as well. And before we do any work to look at this, you're going to have some sort of political will to do it. And I just don't see that coming out of the Republican Party, at least not for the next 2 years.
It will never come out of the Republican Party. There needs to be no more Republican Party. We have plenty of conservative Democrats, and we have Democrats that would welcome refugees from the Republican Party into their ranks gladly. Ted Lieu is one of them. Ted Lieu, I think, actually has a soul. But the rest of them, say Mitch McConnell, they also would be welcomed, even though they shouldn't be. But my point being, there is a place for conservatives to go in American politics, and that is the Democratic Party. It is largely a conservative party right now. The leadership are anything but progressive. They are in the pockets of corporations. Nancy Pelosi, who is stepping down but was most recently in leadership, she did everything in her power to allow politicians to engage in shady stock trades. My point is, conservatives have somewhere to go, but the Republican Party, its infrastructure, its current leadership, they got to go. They are straight up criminals. They are running cover for, they are covering for domestic terrorists. Their propaganda arm in Fox News, and that's not an exaggeration, by the way, you can look up Roger Ailes, they encourage domestic terrorism. So what can you do? What can you actually do about this? It's easier than you might think. This is the most common solution I offer. It is because it is both easy to do and it is effective. Contact your representative. You just heard that studies on extremism in the military were suppressed by the GOP. Go to house.gov. I just realized I'll put the link in the re-upload of this, but go to house.gov, find your representative. There will be an email and a phone number. Pick one. Either email them or call them. Tell them you want a study done about extremism in the military, because we do not want another bin Laden. That dude was armed and trained by the USA. We don't want to be doing that again. Contact your representative. It's as simple as that. Make this part of the conversation regularly. My rule of thumb for this, do it once a week. If it's a topic you genuinely care about, do it once a week. There are not that many people that take the time to contact their representatives, and the people that do tend to be right-wingers. This needs to become a habit of the left. Contact your representative. House.gov, find your representative. Sorry to end it on a Debbie Downer, but the good news is you do have more power than they let you think you have. So odds are, if we as a political group make it a habit to be louder, make it a habit to be more seen, and we take what you're doing right now, following the news, following politics, and we add just a little bit of effort, we make these problems that are the average American's problems into the problems of our representatives, because they got to hear about it from us all the time. If we do that, I think you'll find that the country starts behaving the way you want it to.